So the thing that I noticed with amplifiers is that there are amplifiers that are good with majority of the speakers. They're good, they're okay, but they're not excellent. And then there are amplifiers that are really, really good with certain type of speakers, but they're not that good with other speakers. And then there are shitty amplifiers. And then there is the Thallo. Okay, so the Thallo. The Thallo is, honestly, it troubles me. It troubles the shit out of me. The reason being is very simple. I did not have any expectations for the Thallo to be this good. And their surprise Hades preamplifier, which we will be talking about today, which is released today. It's a new preamplifier. But I want to concentrate on the Thallo, because the Thallo is something special. Now, when I got the Thallo in, I reviewed already the Hestia and Hyperion combination way back when my hair was gray. Now when it comes to the sound quality of the amplifier, like I said, it is able to take on very big dynamic swings, meaning when you have something very, very bass demanding, or something that goes from low volume to high volume really fast, like some electronic music, it is able to do that without a problem. And yeah, I had a lot of good things to say about the Hyperion and Hestia combination. And if you take that and multiply it by 2 times the performance, I would say even 2.5 times the performance, that is what you get with the Thallo and Hades, which is unheard of, which is freaking unheard of. The number one question I get from people is, if I go from $1,000 amplifier to this $2,000 upper model, will I get 2 times the performance? And my answer is freaking no. No. Just no. That's not how it works. But in this case, I am damn surprised to say, yeah, it provides 2 times the performance, but the price difference between the lower model and the Thallo is $500. It's $500. Yet it provides 2 times the performance. Like, I would have to be a psychopath to complain about these. Like, this is the Hades preamplifier, and then this is the Thallo amplifier. So as you can see, we have a huge, humongous, this is my hand, 600 VA toroidal transformer, which is twice the size of the Hyperion. And we have over 200,000 microfarads of filter capacitors. That's more than like Krell, KSA 50, bigger junctions, like full-size amplifiers. And this amplifier is quite compact in comparison to those. Like, it's a solid build. The output rating is 120 watts into 8 ohms and 220 watts into 4 ohms. So that's pretty decent amount of power. You can see the internals. These quality components, 36 capacitors. And on the Hades, as you can see the beautiful transformer right there. I believe that is the O-ring, so it's not the same as the toroidal. O-ring is used in more sensitive stuff like their DACs, preamplifiers. It's just better, quieter, just a better transformer. And you can see the filter capacitors, the relays, the WEMA capacitors, the red ones there, quality components. Now, how does the Thallo sound? Important part. So, the Thallo and the Hades combination is what I used for the majority of the review. And I used other preamplifiers like the Doge 8 or the Serene preamplifier from Kitsune. I've used other preamplifiers. Point aside, I found the Thallo to perform equally as well, but I did find that the Hades did have the best synergy, which obviously because they made it for the Thallo. Where really surprises me is the music that it's able to portray. So this is the Aerosmith album that I play, and I had this in some of my videos and you all commented how shitty of a recording it is. Nevertheless, I enjoy the recording, and I'm sure many of you have recordings that is shitty recorded, but you enjoy it anyways because it sounds good to you. But on certain amplifiers, actually most amplifiers, including the Hestia and Hyperion, which was my criticism of that combo in that video, it doesn't do the job of portraying poor recordings very well. It sounds good with good recordings and sounds terrible with terrible recordings. So if the recording is poorly recorded or recorded with that brightness, then you hear that brightness. Well, it was a surprise when the Hades and Thallo, to me, sounded really good with this recording, which is shitty, like many of you said, and a lot of other music that is terrible. We have a catalog of terrible music because we like to torture ourselves. Jokes aside, I think that the extra headroom, dynamic swing, refinement into high frequency, really improvement in all domains compared to the Hestia and Hyperion combination, which was already freaking fantastic, is a big upgrade in terms of upgrade. Because it upgrades not in just high frequency domain or the mid-range or the bass, but it is a upgrade all across the board. Take soundstage, for example. The soundstage on the Thallo and the Hades combination is pretty freaking fantastic. In my KLH review, which you can see in the back here, by the way, that speaker is going back today, and I'm very sad. If you haven't checked out the review, please check it out because that speaker is freaking fantastic. Going back today until my own pair arrives, that's going back. But anyways, that speaker, I mentioned how I could hear things everywhere, specifically on the track way down. And that was with the Hades and Thallo combination that I was talking mainly about. The Hades and Thallo combination has the soundstage of what I call tubulicious. Tubulicious. It's a word now. It essentially has a really wide soundstage and a deep soundstage which really envelops you and is able to portray this without a problem. Now at times, for example with the NADC298, when I had it with the KLH, I did not get this three-dimensionality. The combination has to be right. So the synergy between the KLH and the Thallo and Hades combination seemed to be almost perfect in harmony. In fact, it is my go-to when it comes to the KLH speakers that I've tested. Now, with other speakers like the PSB, Synchrony, and I'll link to the initial impression video that we did, because in that video we have used this specific combination to test multiple different speakers. And honestly speaking, it was just freaking fantastic. The combination really has refinement in the high frequency and the mid band, and the overall sound is so well rounded that it is very easy to pair with multiple different speakers. It can drive sensitive speakers obviously, but it can also drive very difficult to drive speakers like the KF-LS50 Metas or even the Sonos Faber Electama Taurus, which is a 4-ohm load, which is not the end of the world, difficult to drive, but it's also able to drive speakers like Magnepan, which is very impressive. And talking about drivability, I'm not talking about just the loudness, which yes, it can get very, very loud, but I'm talking about the overall fullness in the mid-range and in the bass. This is not a wimpy sounding combination whatsoever. The Hestia and Hyperion combination was not either, but this takes it to another level of grunt and control in the bass region. Now this is not a perfectly flat sounding or neutral amplifier. It has some color to it. But that color is something that I prefer very much, and it closely resembles to what I like about the Hagel integrated amplifier units. So for example, the Hagel H190 or even the H120 has grunt in the bottom end, but the high frequency is just about perfect in terms of how it rolls off. Now to some people, it may seem like it could extend more and want more extension. And that's what the Hades and Thallo does. Now, obviously the Hyperion and Hestia combination did that as well. However, the Thallo and Hades does it better with better exceptional refinement on the top end of the frequencies. Meaning that you no longer get any kind of edge or brilliance depending on the recording like you did on the Hades and Hyperion. But on most recordings, even the ones that are recorded bright, you get perfect bells and whistles and chimes that is non-sibilant. All the details are there, but it's refined, edges are just rounded enough that you don't get fatigued in the long listening sessions. And you get that mid bass. And I know you guys love it when I talk about the mid bass. The mid bass on this is exceptionally punchy and tight and dynamic. It is even more so than the Hestia and Hyperion combination and the likes of the Kinky Studio XM1 Plus, which I reviewed a while back. Now, the Kinky Studio XM1 Plus I find is a more neutral and uncolored sound versus the Thallo and the Hades. The Thallo and Hades has, like I said, a coloration similar to what I associate with the KLH or the Sonus Fiber Electa Motor in speaker terms, which means that it has a little bit of that mid-bass energy and grunt with really linear bass extension as well in the lower sub-regions, which makes for a room rumbling power dynamic, but also a tasteful mid-bass punch when demanded, which means that when you play tracks with bass-heavy tracks or tracks that has bass energy, that translates to the vocal region. You're not just hearing thin voice sounds, but you hear a very nice grunt with the voices. And what do I mean by grunt? Grunt. What the hell do you mean? Well, grunt means to me like when you sing, right? You hear that deep voices in the male voices, for example. This track here by Leonard Cohen, right? You hear deep voices. Whereas with stuff like neutral amplifiers, neutral sounding amplifiers like the NAZ C298 or the Kinky Studio XM1 Plus or other neutral sounding amplifiers, you know what I'm talking about, you get that mid-range that is a bit lean sounding, which doesn't translate exactly to the same amount of girth and voices. It's like me talking like this versus me talking like this. So the Thallo and the Hades is more like this, talking like this, a little bit more masculine, has more tone to the voice and more muscularity, versus the other amplifiers, I may be just talking like this normally. So in terms of accuracy, some people may prefer that neutrality. But with the Hades and the Thallo, which I over-exaggerated, obviously, you get that extra little bit of girth and earthiness to the sound, which makes for a more pleasing sound, not in just stereo when you listen to music, but also in home theater settings or in 2.1 channel settings where you're actually watching movies and the dialogue is more earthy. Did you get the files, Jim? There's the files there. Did we get him? Did we get him? Now that was a bit of a husky rather than an earthy, but point aside, I hope you get the point. The other thing that I want to mention is that when it comes to amplifiers like this that has that earthy, grippy sound, which it also in the Hegel amplifier it does, you tend to lose a little bit of that high frequency excitement, refinement, and also the mid-range, upper mid-range doesn't excel as well. It's a trade-off. Well, I say that the Hades and the Thallo is exceptional because when mated with the Hades, you get perfect balance between that mid-bass energy, lower frequency extension, and the high frequency excitement and extension and air and soundstage. It is just like a perfect synergy. However, when you make the Thallo with other preamplifiers, I found that the other colorations come into light. When I connected to the Doge 8 tube preamplifier versus the solid state of the Hades, I found the sound to become more holographic, more 3D-like, and also the high frequency extends more and is more exciting. However, at the expense of that grip and grunt in the bass region, which is still there, but not as much as with the Hades, and the balance is now a little bit towards the higher frequencies. Where if I made it with the Serene preamplifier, now I find things to be more smoother across the board, but the bass is not as well defined. The high frequency is not as refined, but more rather smooth and in a way smeared out. So I found the Hades to be a perfect balance, and it makes sense because they made it for the Thallo. And imaging is something that is really good across the board regardless of what preamplifier you use. I found the Thallo to have really pinpoint imaging to the side, to the middle. It has really good detail while it is smooth sounding on the top end without any fatigue. It is very good with the overall detail retrieval and little nuances in the music like imaging and centered imaging as well. However, if you are more into high frequency excitement and foot tapping sound, rock and roll all the way kind of sound, instead of a more refined, more soft sounding, smooth sounding, not soft sounding, smooth sounding high frequency, then you may prefer the Hestia and Hyperion combination instead. Now the last thing that I want to note in this video is that it is a truly balanced design, as you saw in the text of this video, in the beginning of this video, which means that the Thallo only has balanced inputs. Now, while I would have liked to see RCA, it is not such a bad thing because this is a truly balanced design and they want you to maximize the performance. So they are just saying use balanced. This is for balanced, use balanced for this amplifier. Which means if you're not getting the Hades preamplifier, then you have to make sure that your preamplifier also has balanced outputs. If you don't, you can use a converter, but you have to talk to Denafrips about that, about compatibility with the converters and your preamplifier as well to make sure it's compatible. But other than that, I find this to be exceptional in terms of its performance. I was quite surprised. It is heaps better than the Hestia and Hyperion. And I do prefer the Thallo and Hades combination in comparison to the Kinky Studio XM1 Plus and ADC298. And really, amplifiers within this price range, I do think that the Hades and the Thallo is a better match with majority of the speakers out there in terms of its sound signature. And if there is a con, there is one, and that is that it gets hot. If you leave it on for a long period of time, it does get really hot, and that is primarily because it is Class AB design, so the first portion of the few watts is Class A, and I believe they actually bias it so that there's more Class A than other brands, so therefore it gets really hot. Now this may be a bad thing, but since winter is coming, this may not be such a bad thing, but when summer comes and if you don't have AC, then that may be a problem, so keep that in mind. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace!